The bookshop door creaked one last time as Winifred Easton turned the hand-painted sign to closed, her fingers trembling against the glass that had grown dusty from months of fewer and fewer customers walking through. It was 1883, and Alpine, Texas had proven too small and too wild for a place that sold dreams bound in leather and paper. The cattle ranchers who passed through town wanted whiskey and women, not Whitman and Wordsworth. The miners heading toward the silver strikes in Mexico had no use for Shakespeare or Shelley. Even the railroad workers who sometimes lingered in town between shifts preferred the saloon to her shelves. Winifred pressed her forehead against the door and let herself feel the weight of failure for just a moment. She was 24 years old, unmarried, and about to lose the only thing that had ever truly belonged to her. Her father had been a teacher back in Boston, filling their small apartment with books until the consumption took him when she was 17. Her mother had followed him 6 months later, leaving Winifred with a trunk full of volumes and a desperate need for a fresh start somewhere no one knew her as the orphan girl. Texas had seemed like an adventure 5 years ago. The advertisement in the Boston newspaper had made Alpine sound like a growing town with opportunity for entrepreneurs willing to take a risk. She had sold everything except the books, bought a ticket west, and used her small inheritance to lease the corner building on Avenue E. For the first year, curiosity had brought people in. The second year had been slower. By the third year, she was selling more lamp oil and writing paper than actual books just to make rent. Now, in the spring of her 5th year, she was 3 months behind on payments, and the landlord had made it clear he would rather rent to someone opening another saloon. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced above the shelves. Winifred had spent the morning creating an inventory list, counting every single volume that remained, 473 books. Some were classics she had brought from Boston. Others she had ordered from publishers back east, spending money she could not afford on the foolish hope that someone in this dusty Texas town would want to read about far-off places and impossible romances. She heard boots on the wooden sidewalk outside and quickly wiped her eyes. Even in defeat, she would maintain her dignity. The footsteps stopped at her door and she heard a knock despite the closed sign clearly visible. "We're closed," she called out, her voice steadier than she felt. "Permanently." The knock came again, more insistent this time. Winifred sighed and turned the lock, opening the door just enough to see who was so determined to ignore a simple sign. A man stood on her threshold, tall enough that she had to tilt her head back to see his face properly. He wore dusty traveling clothes, a worn leather vest over a blue shirt that had once been darker, and a hat that had seen better days. His face was sun-weathered in the way of men who spent their lives outdoors, with lines around his eyes that suggested he was somewhere in his late 20s. Those eyes were an unusual shade of gray-green, and they were currently studying her with an intensity that made her want to step backward. "Sign says you're closing," he said. His voice was deeper than she expected, with a slight drawl that marked him as someone who had spent time in Texas, though she detected hints of something else underneath, maybe Oklahoma or Kansas. "That's correct," Winifred replied, keeping her hand on the door frame. "I'm sorry, but I'm not selling anything today." "Not looking to buy just one thing," the man said. He removed his hat, revealing dark brown hair that needed a trim. "Name's Emmett Xavier. I'm looking to buy everything." Winifred blinked. "I don't understand." "Your books," Emmett said, gesturing past her into the shop. "All of them. How much would it cost to buy every book you have?" She felt her mouth open and close without sound. Of all the things she had expected today, this was not among them. "That's not possible," she finally managed. "There are hundreds of books in here. 473, according to what I could see you writing this morning when I passed by." Emmett's expression did not change. "I can pay cash. You were watching me. I was walking by." Couldn't help but notice someone who looked like their whole world was ending. He said it matter-of-factly, without pity, which somehow made it easier to hear. "So how much?" Winifred's mind raced. She had been planning to sell the books individually over the next few weeks, hoping to make back at least a portion of what she had invested. But if someone truly wanted to buy the entire inventory at once, that would be enough to pay off her debts and maybe, just maybe, have enough left over for a ticket back to Boston, and a few months of rent while she figured out what to do with the rest of her life. "I would need to calculate a fair price," she said slowly. "Many of these books are quite valuable, first editions, rare printings." "I'll give you $3,000 for the lot," Emmett said. The number hit her like a physical blow. $3,000 was more than twice what she had calculated the inventory to be worth. It was more money than she had seen in years. It was enough to start over anywhere she wanted, do anything she wanted. "Why?" The word came out as a whisper. "Why would you pay so much for books in a town that clearly doesn't want them?" Emmett looked past her into the shop, his gaze moving across the shelves with something that might have been longing. "Maybe I think this town needs them whether they know it or not. Maybe I'm tired of places that only value what they can drink or gamble away. Or maybe I just think it's a damn shame to see someone lose something they clearly love." He looked back at her, and Winifred felt something shift in her chest. This strange cowboy with his weathered face and intense eyes was offering her salvation, and she could not understand why. "I don't even know you," she said. "No, madam, you don't. But I know what it's like to lose something that matters. And I've got money I earned driving cattle up to Kansas last season. Money that's been sitting in a bank in Fort Stockton doing nothing useful." He reached into his vest and pulled out a leather wallet. "I can go to the bank right now and come back with cash if you're willing to sell." Winifred's practical side screamed at her to say yes, to take this miracle and run before he changed his mind. But something else made her hesitate. "What will you do with them?" "The books." "That depends on you." "On me," Emmett nodded. "How much would it cost to pay your back rent and stock some new inventory?" "I don't understand what you're asking." "I'm asking how much it would take to reopen this place properly, to give it a real chance." He stepped closer, and Winifred caught the scent of leather and sage and something else she could not name. "I'll buy every book in here, and then I'll give you the money to reopen the shop. Run it the way you want to run it. All I ask is that you actually give this town a chance to prove it can appreciate what you're offering." "That's insane," Winifred said, but her heart was pounding. "You don't know me. You don't know if I'm any good at running a business. Clearly, I've already failed once." "Doesn't look like failure to me. Looks like you've been trying to do something good in a place that wasn't ready for it yet. Sometimes timing is everything." Emmett put his hat back on. "Think about it. I'm staying at the boarding house on Sul Ross Avenue. Send word before tomorrow evening if you're interested." He turned to leave, and Winifred heard herself say, "Wait." Emmett paused, looking back over his shoulder. "Why are you really doing this?" For the first time, something that might have been a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Because I walked by your window 3 times this week, and each time I saw you reading to a little Mexican girl while her mother shopped at the general store. Because I saw you give a book to an old prospector who probably couldn't pay you a dime. Because last night I saw you sitting in here alone with just one lamp burning, and you were crying over a copy of poetry like it was a lost friend." His expression turned serious again. "This town needs people who care about something more than silver and cattle." Maybe I'm just trying to make sure at least one of them stays." Then he was gone, his boots echoing down the sidewalk, leaving Winifred standing in her doorway with her mind spinning and her heart doing strange things in her chest. She closed the door slowly and turned to look at her shop. The late afternoon light made everything glow golden. The books stood in neat rows, waiting for readers who had never come in the numbers she had hoped. The small reading corner she had created with two mismatched chairs, and a table seemed pathetic now, a child's dream of what a literary sanctuary should be. But as she looked, she tried to see it through Emmett Xavier's eyes. He had noticed the little girl, Rosa, whose mother brought her twice a week. He had seen old Samuel, the prospector who wandered in sometimes just to get out of the sun. He had been watching her, learning about her, and instead of seeing failure, he had seen something worth saving. Winifred walked to the shelf where she kept her most precious books, the ones her father had owned. She pulled out a worn copy of Keats and opened it to a page she knew by heart. "A thing of beauty is a joy forever. Its loveliness increases. It will never pass into nothingness." Her father had believed that. He had taught her to believe it too. And here was a stranger offering her a chance to keep believing it, to prove that beauty and books and dreams could survive even in the harsh reality of West Texas. She knew what she had to do. The next morning, Winifred put on her best dress, the dark blue one with the white collar that made her look more businesslike than she felt, and walked to the boarding house on Sul Ross Avenue. The day was already warm, promising the kind of heat that would make the afternoon almost unbearable. A few people were out on the streets, mostly shopkeepers sweeping their storefronts and ranch hands already heading toward the saloons despite the early hour. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the boarding house, looked surprised to see her. "Miss Easton, what brings you here this morning?" "I'm looking for one of your guests, Emmett Xavier. He said he was staying here." Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows rose with interest. "He is indeed. Room at the top of the stairs, last door on the right. Shall I announce you?" "No, thank you, I can find it." The older woman looked disappointed but stepped aside. Winifred climbed the narrow stairs, her heart beating faster with each step. She had rehearsed what she would say a dozen times while lying awake last night, but now all her carefully planned words seemed to evaporate. She knocked on the door Mrs. Patterson had indicated. "It's open," came Emmett's voice from inside. Winifred pushed the door open and found him sitting at a small table near the window, papers spread out in front of him. He looked up, and she saw genuine surprise cross his face. "Miss Easton, I didn't expect you until later." "I couldn't sleep," she said honestly. "I kept thinking about your offer." Emmett stood, gesturing to the room's only other chair. "Please sit down." The room was small but clean, with a bed, a washstand, and the table where he had been working. Through the window, she could see down into the street below. This must have been where he had watched her shop, she realized. "I have questions," Winifred said, remaining standing. "If I agree to this, what exactly are the terms?" "You said you would buy all the books and give me money to reopen the shop, but nothing in this world is free. What do you want in return?" "Nothing you're thinking," Emmett said quietly. "I'm not trying to buy you if that's your concern. I'm offering a business arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" "I buy your current inventory for $3,000. That pays off your debts and gives you some security. Then I loan you another $2,000 to stock new inventory, make repairs to the shop, advertise in the county newspaper. You pay me back over time with a small interest rate, say 5%. In the meantime, you run the shop as you see fit. I'm not looking to control what you sell or how you run things." "Why would you trust me with that much money? I could just take it and leave." "You could," Emmett agreed. "But you won't." "How can you be so sure?" "Because you love those books too much to abandon them, because you cried over poetry, because you read to a little girl who probably doesn't speak much English yet, teaching her anyway. He picked up one of the papers from the table. I did some checking yesterday, asked around about you. Everyone says the same thing. You're honest, hardworking, and stubborn as a mule. Those are good qualities for a business owner. Winifred felt her cheeks flush. You investigated me. I did my due diligence, same as you should do with me. He held out the paper he had picked up. This is a letter of credit from the bank in Fort Stockton. You can verify I have the funds I'm claiming. I've also got references from 3 different cattle outfits I've worked for over the past 5 years. I'm not some drifter trying to pull a confidence scheme. She took the paper, looking at the official bank letterhead and the substantial figure written there. Emmett Xavier was not just solvent, he was actually quite well off for a working cowboy. I still don't understand why, she said softly. Men don't just give away money to women they don't know, not without wanting something in return. Emmett was quiet for a long moment. He turned to look out the window, his profile sharp against the morning light. My mother was a teacher, he said finally, back in Missouri. She taught reading and writing to anyone who wanted to learn, rich or poor, white or black or Indian. This was before the war and after. She believed education was the only thing that could save people from ignorance and hate. He paused, and Winifred waited, sensing there was more. She died 6 years ago. Cholera outbreak. She was helping nurse sick families and she caught it herself. His voice was steady, but Winifred heard the pain underneath. Before she died, she made me promise that I would do something good with whatever success I found. Something that would have made her proud. I've been carrying that promise around for 6 years, trying to figure out how to keep it. He turned back to face her. Then I came to Alpine to meet with a rancher about a cattle drive, and I walked past your shop. I saw what you were trying to do, and I thought maybe this was how I could keep my promise. By helping someone who's trying to do what my mother did. Share knowledge. Share beauty. Give people a chance to be more than they are. Winifred felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back, refusing to cry in front of this man who had already seen her cry once. Your mother sounds like she was a remarkable woman. She was. You remind me of her a little bit. That same stubborn determination to make the world better even when the world doesn't want to cooperate. I'm not sure if that's a compliment or an insult. It's the highest compliment I know how to give. Winifred looked down at the letter of credit in her hands. $5,000 total. Enough to save her shop, to make it truly viable, to give her dream a real chance to succeed. All offered by a stranger with sad eyes and a promise to his dead mother. If I agree, she said slowly, I want everything in writing, a proper contract with clear terms. I won't accept charity, even well-meaning charity. This has to be a legitimate business arrangement. Agreed. And I want to pay you back with 6% interest, not 5%. If I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it properly. Something that might have been respect flickered in Emmett's eyes. If you insist, I do, and I want one more thing. What's that? I want to know you're going to be around long enough to see if this works. I don't want you to hand over this money and then disappear. If we're going to be business partners, even temporarily, I want to know I can find you if I have questions or problems. Emmett nodded slowly. I was planning to take a cattle drive to Kansas in early summer, but I can delay it. The ranch I was going to work for can find another trail boss. I'll stay in Alpine through the fall. That should be enough time to see if your shop can turn a profit. You would give up work to stay here. The cattle will still need driving next year, and like I said, I've got enough money put aside. I can afford to take a few months off from trail driving. He extended his hand. Do we have an agreement, Miss Easton? Winifred looked at his hand, rough and calloused from years of hard work. This was insane. She barely knew this man, He could be lying about everything, though the bank letter suggested otherwise. She could be making the biggest mistake of her life, or she could be accepting a miracle. She reached out and shook his hand. His grip was firm but careful, and she felt the calluses against her palm. "We have an agreement, Mr. Xavier. Let's go see the bank and make this official." The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity that left Winifred exhausted every night but more alive than she had felt in years. Emmett was true to his word, handling the financial transactions with the efficiency of someone used to managing large business deals. The contract he had drawn up by Alpine's lawyer was fair and straightforward, protecting both of them equally. With her debts paid and working capital in the bank, Winifred threw herself into reimagining her bookshop. She ordered new inventory from publishers in New York and Boston, choosing a mix of popular novels, practical books on farming and ranching that might appeal to local residents, and a carefully selected collection of classics. She hired a carpenter to build new shelves and repair the front window that had been cracked for over a year. She bought a new sign, beautifully painted with gold lettering that read, "Easton's Books and Sundries." Emmett was there almost every day, though he was careful to stay in the background. He helped move heavy furniture without being asked, offered suggestions when she seemed stuck on a decision, and occasionally brought coffee and pastries from the bakery down the street, when he noticed she had forgotten to eat lunch again. They talked while they worked, and Winifred found herself learning about this quiet cowboy who had saved her dream. He had been born in Missouri, the only child of a schoolteacher and a farmer. His father had died during the war, killed at Wilson's Creek when Emmett was just 10 years old. His mother had supported them by teaching, and Emmett had grown up surrounded by books and learning despite their poverty. "She wanted me to go to college," Emmett told her one afternoon as they unpacked a shipment of books that had just arrived from St. Louis. "Had her heart set on me becoming a lawyer or a teacher. But after she died, I just wanted to get away from everything that reminded me of her, so I came to Texas and hired on with a cattle outfit." "Do you regret it?" Winifred asked, carefully unwrapping a beautiful leather-bound copy of Dickens. "Sometimes. I think she would have been disappointed that I didn't pursue more education, but trail driving taught me things no college could. How to read the weather and the land, how to handle men from all different backgrounds, how to save money and invest wisely." He smiled slightly. "I like to think she would have appreciated the practical education, even if it wasn't what she imagined for me." "I think she would be proud of what you're doing now," Winifred said softly, "keeping your promise to her." "I hope so. Though I have to admit, I'm getting more out of this than I expected." "What do you mean?" Emmett gestured around the shop, which was slowly transforming into something beautiful and inviting. "I'm enjoying this, helping build something instead of just driving cattle from one place to another. Feels more permanent, more meaningful." Winifred felt warmth spread through her chest. She had been trying not to think too much about how much she looked forward to seeing Emmett each day, how much easier the work seemed when he was there, how natural it felt to talk with him about everything from book recommendations to childhood memories. This was a business arrangement, she reminded herself. He was staying for a few months to ensure his investment was sound. That was all, but her heart seemed to have other ideas. The grand reopening of Easton's Books and Sundries took place on a Saturday in late May. Winifred had placed advertisements in the Alpine Avalanche newspaper and printed handbills that she distributed throughout town. She was terrified that no one would come, that the town would reject her shop just as thoroughly as they had before. She need not have worried. By 10 in the morning, a steady stream of curious customers was flowing through her door. Some came because they remembered the shop from before. Others were drawn by curiosity about what had changed. Still others seemed to come, because word had spread that Emmett Xavier, a man increasingly respected in Alpine's small community, had invested in the venture. Winifred had prepared for the reopening by creating several sections specifically designed to appeal to locals. She had books on cattle ranching, farming, and mining. She had dime novels and adventure stories for the men who wanted entertainment. She had romantic novels and domestic guides for the women. And she had a children's section with picture books and simple readers that drew mothers like bees to honey. Rosa came with her mother, Maria, and Winifred saw the little girl's eyes go wide at the sight of the new children's corner with its small chairs and colorful books. "Para mai?" Rosa asked her mother in wonder. "See, Mija," Maria said, smiling at Winifred. "Miss Easton made this special place just for children like you." Winifred knelt down to Rosa's level. "Would you like me to read you a story?" Rosa nodded enthusiastically, and soon Winifred had a small crowd of children gathered around her as she read from a beautifully illustrated copy of fairy tales. Their parents browsed the adult sections, and Winifred noticed with satisfaction that several of them had books in their hands when she finished the story. Emmett worked the cash register, something they had purchased specifically for the reopening. He was surprisingly good with the customers, making recommendations with a quiet authority that people seemed to trust. When rancher Hank Morrison expressed skepticism about buying a book on cattle diseases, Emmett talked to him about specific problems he had encountered on trail drives and how information from veterinary guides had saved entire herds. Morrison left with 3 books. By the time they closed the shop that evening, Winifred's feet ached and her voice was hoarse from talking to customers all day, but her heart was soaring. They had sold 47 books, plus various sundries like paper, ink, and writing implements. It was more business than she had done in the previous 3 months combined. "We did it," she said, hardly daring to believe it as she counted the day's receipts. "We actually did it." Emmett was leaning against the counter, looking tired but pleased. "You did it. I just helped a little." "A little? You're the reason any of this exists." Winifred gestured around the transformed shop. "Without you, I would have been on a stage coach back to Boston by now." Would that have been so bad? Going back to Boston? Winifred considered the question seriously. A month ago, she would have said no. Boston represented safety, familiarity, a return to her roots. But now, looking around the shop filled with books and possibility, she realized something had changed. "Yes," she said firmly. "It would have been bad, because this is where I belong. This shop, this town, this life I'm building here. I didn't realize it before, but Texas isn't just where I ran to after my parents died. It's become home." Emmett's expression softened. "I know what you mean. I've been drifting from job to job for years, never staying anywhere long enough to really settle. But being here, helping with this, it feels different. Feels like maybe I could put down roots somewhere." Their eyes met, and Winifred felt something electric pass between them. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Emmett cleared his throat and straightened up. "I should let you close up. You must be exhausted." "I am," Winifred admitted. "But it's a good exhaustion, the kind that comes from doing something worthwhile, the best kind." Emmett retrieved his hat from where he had left it behind the counter. "Same time tomorrow. We should ride this momentum and stay open on Sunday afternoon after church lets out." "That's a wonderful idea. Yes, same time tomorrow." He paused at the door. "You did good today, Winifred. Your father would have been proud." The use of her first name sent a little thrill through her, but she tried to keep her voice steady. "Thank you, Emmett, for everything." After he left, Winifred finished closing up the shop. She counted the money again, recording everything carefully in her ledger. Then she simply sat in the quiet store, surrounded by books and dreams come true, and let herself feel genuinely happy for the first time in longer than she could remember. As spring turned to summer, the bookshop continued to thrive. Word spread through the surrounding ranches and smaller settlements that Alpine had a proper bookstore with a surprising selection. Cowboys riding through town on their way to, or from cattle drives would stop in, drawn by Emmett's reputation, and staying to browse books they hadn't seen since leaving their homes back east or in the Midwest. Winifred established regular reading hours for children 3 times a week, which became so popular that she had to expand the children's section twice. She started a lending library for people who couldn't afford to buy books outright, charging a small fee that helped supplement her income. She even began hosting occasional literary discussions on Sunday afternoons, where readers could gather to discuss books they had read and share recommendations. Through it all, Emmett was a constant presence. He had taken a job as a foreman at the nearby Cimarron Ranch, work that was less demanding than trail driving and allowed him to stay in Alpine. He spent his free time at the bookshop, helping with heavy lifting, making repairs, and gradually reading his way through the sections on history and philosophy. They fell into an easy companionship that felt both comfortable and charged with unspoken possibility. Winifred found herself watching for him throughout the day, feeling a lift in her spirits when she heard his boots on the shop's wooden floor. She noticed the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the careful way he handled the books, the gentleness in his voice when he helped elderly Mrs. Chen find a cookbook written in English that she could follow. For his part, Emmett seemed equally aware of her. She caught him watching her when he thought she was absorbed in cataloging new inventory. He brought her wildflowers from the ranch, casual offerings that he claimed were just growing along the road. He remembered how she took her coffee and made sure she had a cup waiting when she arrived in the mornings if he got there first. But neither of them spoke of what was growing between them. Winifred told herself it was too complicated, that their relationship was professional, and she should not risk making it uncomfortable. Emmett maintained a careful, respectful distance, never presuming on their friendship or making her feel pressured. It was Mrs. Patterson from the boarding house who finally addressed what everyone in town had apparently noticed. She came into the shop one hot July afternoon ostensibly to buy a book, but really, Winifred suspected, to meddle. "You and Mr. Xavier make a fine team," the older woman said, her eyes twinkling with knowing amusement. "Half the ladies in town are jealous that you have such a handsome and capable gentleman spending so much time at your establishment." Winifred felt her cheeks heat. "Mr. Xavier is my business partner and friend, that's all." "Oh, is that what you young people are calling it these days?" Mrs. Patterson laughed at Winifred's mortified expression. "My dear, I've been watching people fall in love for more years than you've been alive. I know what it looks like. And that young man is absolutely smitten with you." "That's not true. He's just being kind and honoring his commitment to helping my shop succeed." "Is that why he turned down a very lucrative offer to boss a trail drive to Wyoming? Or why he lights up like a Christmas candle every time you walk into a room? Or why he's been asking around about buying property in town?" Winifred's heart skipped. "He's buying property, apparently looking at a parcel on the east side of town. Good land, suitable for building a house." Mrs. Patterson selected a book at random from the nearest shelf. Now, why would a cowboy who spent years drifting from ranch to ranch suddenly want to put down permanent roots in Alpine? "Can't imagine it has anything to do with a certain pretty librarian who saved up all her courage and came to Texas to chase a dream." After Mrs. Patterson left, Winifred found herself unable to focus on work. Was it true? Did Emmett really have feelings for her beyond friendship? And if so, what was she supposed to do about it? She had spent so long focused on saving her shop and building her business that she had pushed aside any thoughts of romance or marriage. Those were luxuries for women with more secure futures. But now her future was secure, or at least more secure than it had been in years. The shop was profitable. She had paid back nearly a third of what she owed Emmett, and at the current rate, she would have the loan fully repaid within 2 years. She was a successful businesswoman in a growing town. Maybe she could allow herself to want more than just financial stability. Maybe she could allow herself to want love. That evening, Emmett arrived just as she was closing up. "Sorry I'm late," he said, looking dusty and tired from his day at the ranch. One of the horses got itself tangled in some mesquite, and it took hours to extract the poor beast without injuring it further. "Is the horse all right?" "Will be, with some rest and care. Mostly scared and scraped up." He removed his hat and ran a hand through his hair. "I was hoping to catch you before you left. Wanted to ask if you would have dinner with me tomorrow evening. There's a new restaurant that opened near the train depot, supposed to have decent food." Winifred's pulse quickened. In all the months they had known each other, they had never had a formal dinner together, just working lunches grabbed between tasks. Like a social engagement. Yes, like a social engagement, like me courting you if I'm being honest about intentions. Emmett met her eyes directly. "I know I said this was just a business arrangement, and I've tried to keep things professional. But I can't keep pretending that I don't have feelings for you, Winifred. These past months working with you, getting to know you, watching you succeed, it's been the happiest I've been in years. I would like the chance to see if this could be more than a business partnership, if you're willing." Winifred felt like the air had been knocked out of her lungs. This was really happening. Emmett Xavier, the mysterious cowboy who had saved her shop and then stayed to help her rebuild her dream, was standing in her bookstore asking to court her. "I'm willing," she said, her voice coming out shakier than she intended. "I would very much like to have dinner with you tomorrow evening." The smile that broke across Emmett's face was worth every moment of uncertainty. 6 o'clock. I'll pick you up from your boarding house." 6 o'clock, Winifred confirmed. She spent the next day in a state of nervous excitement that made it nearly impossible to focus on work. She helped customers while mentally reviewing the limited contents of her wardrobe, trying to decide what to wear. She cataloged new inventory while wondering what they would talk about at dinner, just the two of them, without the comfortable buffer of bookshop business to discuss. By the time 6 o'clock arrived, she had changed dresses 3 times and settled on the green one with the lace collar that her boarding house roommate insisted brought out her eyes. She heard the knock precisely at 6 and opened the door to find Emmett looking equally nervous and freshly scrubbed, wearing what was clearly his best shirt, and a vest she had never seen before. "You look beautiful," he said simply, and the sincerity in his voice made her feel like she actually was. "You look very handsome yourself." They walked to the restaurant through the warm evening, Alpine's main street busy with the end-of-day activity. People nodded to them as they passed, and Winifred was acutely aware that by tomorrow morning, everyone in town would know that she and Emmett had gone to dinner together. In a place like Alpine, such things did not go unnoticed. The new restaurant was called the Cattleman's Table, and it was nicer than Winifred had expected, with real tablecloths and china plates. They ordered steak and potatoes, and Winifred found that her nervousness began to fade as they fell into conversation. Without the distraction of customers or inventory, they talked about deeper things. Emmett told her about his years on the cattle trails, the beauty and hardship of driving thousands of animals across hundreds of miles. He described sleeping under stars so bright, They seemed close enough to touch, crossing rivers swollen with spring runoff, fighting grass fires and stampedes, and the simple grinding exhaustion of months in the saddle. But the worst part wasn't the danger or the discomfort, he said, cutting into his steak. It was the loneliness, being surrounded by dozens of other cowboys but never really connecting with any of them. Everyone was just passing through, working for pay, then moving on to the next job. No real friendships, no real purpose beyond earning money and staying alive. "Is that why you stopped?" Winifred asked. "Why you decided to stay here instead of going on another drive?" "Partly. But mostly it was because I found something worth staying for." His eyes met hers across the table. "Someone worth staying for." Winifred felt her breath catch. "Emmett. I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a few months. But I've done a lot of living in my 28 years, and I've learned that when you find something good, you don't let it slip away just because the timing seems wrong or it wasn't what you planned." He reached across the table and took her hand carefully, as if half expecting her to pull away. "You're the best thing that's happened to me since my mother died. You make me want to build something permanent instead of just drifting. You make me believe in the things she tried to teach me about education and culture and making the world better. You make me happy, Winifred." "You make me happy too," she whispered. "I was so lost before you came into my shop that day, not just financially, but in every way that matters. I was giving up on my dreams, on Texas, on everything. And then you appeared and gave me a reason to keep fighting. You believed in me when I had stopped believing in myself. So we saved each other then. I suppose we did." They finished dinner holding hands across the table, talking about everything and nothing, reluctant for the evening to end. Emmett walked her back to her boarding house as the sky turned purple and the first stars appeared. At her door, he hesitated. "May I kiss you?" he asked. Winifred answered by rising on her toes and pressing her lips to his. The kiss was gentle and sweet, full of promise and possibility. When they parted, she saw her own wonder reflected in his eyes. "Good night, Emmett." "Good night, Winifred. I'll see you tomorrow at the shop. I'll be there." She watched him walk away into the evening, one hand pressed to her lips where she could still feel the warmth of his kiss. Then she went inside, climbed the stairs to her small room, and lay awake for hours thinking about handsome cowboys and impossible dreams, and the way love could sneak up on you when you least expected it. The courtship that followed was the subject of much gossip and approval throughout Alpine. Emmett and Winifred made no secret of their growing affection, and the town seemed genuinely pleased that their quiet librarian and the respected rancher had found each other. They attended church socials together, took Sunday walks along the creek that ran north of town, and spent countless hours at the bookshop talking about literature and life and their hopes for the future. Emmett officially bought the property Mrs. Patterson had mentioned, a nice parcel with several oak trees and a good view of the mountains. He hired a carpenter and began drawing up plans for a house, though he was careful to make sure Winifred knew he was not presuming anything. "I need a place of my own regardless," he told her one Sunday as they sat in the shade of the bookshop's back porch, watching the afternoon shadows lengthen. "Can't live in a boarding house forever, but I'll admit I'm designing it with the hope that you might someday want to share it with me." "Someday?" Winifred asked, leaning against his shoulder. "When you're ready. I'm not rushing you. I know you value your independence and your shop. I would never ask you to give those up. What if I told you I'm ready now?" Emmett pulled back to look at her, surprise and hope warring in his expression. "Are you sure? We've only been courting for a few months. I'm 24 years old and I've been independent since I was 17. I know my own mind." Winifred took his hand. "I love you, Emmett Xavier. I think I started loving you the day you walked into my shop and offered me a miracle. I don't need more time to be sure of that. I love you too. God, I love you so much." He kissed her, deep and passionate, then rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me then, be my wife. We'll build our house and our life together." "Yes," she said, joy bubbling up inside her like champagne. "Yes, I'll marry you." They were married in late September when the brutal Texas heat had finally broken and the evenings carried the first hints of coolness. The ceremony took place in Alpine's small church, with what seemed like half the town cramming into the pews to witness the union. Winifred wore a simple white dress ordered from a dressmaker in Fort Davis, and Emmett wore a new suit that made him look almost uncomfortably formal. Rosa served as flower girl, scattering petals with serious concentration while her mother beamed from the front pew. Old Samuel, the prospector, had somehow acquired a harmonica and played a surprisingly moving rendition of a wedding march. Mrs. Patterson cried into her handkerchief through the entire service. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Emmett kissed Winifred with such tender passion that several of the older ladies in attendance fanned themselves and giggled like girls. Afterward, there was a reception at the church hall with food contributed by seemingly everyone in town, a fiddle band that appeared from somewhere, and dancing that lasted until well after dark. "Happy?" Emmett asked as they danced together, the lamplight casting warm shadows around them. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Winifred replied honestly. "A year ago, I was preparing to lose everything. Now I have a thriving business, a wonderful husband, and a whole community that's become my family. It's more than I ever dreamed of having." "We're just getting started," Emmett promised. "Wait until you see what the rest of our lives looks like." They moved into Emmett's newly completed house in October, a sturdy structure with 3 bedrooms, a big kitchen, and a front porch that overlooked the mountains. Emmett had built extensive bookshelves into the walls of what they called the library room, and Winifred filled them with volumes from her personal collection, and new books she kept acquiring. The bookshop continued to flourish under Winifred's management, with Emmett taking on more of the business side of operations while maintaining his foreman position at the Cimarron Ranch. They made a formidable team, combining her love of literature and people with his practical business sense and community connections. In the spring of 1885, Winifred discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with excited trepidation. They had talked about children in the abstract, but the reality of becoming parents felt momentous and terrifying and wonderful all at once. "I hope he has your eyes," Winifred said one evening as they sat on their porch, her hand resting on her still flat belly. "Could be a girl," Emmett pointed out, "and I hope she has your stubborn determination and love of books. He or she can have both our best qualities and none of our worst ones. That seems fair." Their son was born in December, a healthy baby boy with a powerful set of lungs and his father's dark hair. They named him Thomas, after Winifred's father. Holding her son for the first time, looking at Emmett's awestruck expression as he cradled the tiny bundle, Winifred felt a completeness she had not known was possible. Thomas proved to be a happy, curious baby who seemed to love books as much as his mother. By the time he was a year old, he would sit contentedly in the bookshop's children's corner, carefully turning the pages of picture books while Winifred helped customers. Emmett taught him to ride almost as soon as he could walk, setting him on a gentle mare and walking beside him around the property. When Thomas was 2, Winifred became pregnant again. This time they had a daughter, Catherine, named after Emmett's mother. She was quieter than her brother, with serious gray-green eyes that saw everything. From the beginning, she seemed to understand that the world was full of stories waiting to be discovered, Life settled into a pattern that felt both exciting and comfortingly stable. Emmett continued working at the Cimarron Ranch, eventually becoming part owner when the original owner decided to retire. Winifred ran the bookshop with increasing success, expanding into a second room and hiring a young assistant to help manage the growing business. They were respected members of Alpine's community, active in the church and various civic organizations. The town grew around them. The railroad brought more people and commerce. More businesses opened along the main streets. A proper school was built, and Winifred donated books for its library. The rough frontier settlement they had known was slowly becoming something more civilized, more permanent. But they never forgot the early days, when everything had seemed impossible, and a cowboy with sad eyes and a promise to his dead mother had walked into a failing bookshop and changed two lives forever. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Emmett gave Winifred a leather-bound journal with blank pages. "For your story," he said, "I think you should write down everything that happened, how you came to Texas, how the shop almost failed, how we found each other. So our children and their children will know where we came from." "You think anyone would want to read about us?" Winifred asked, touched by the gift. "I think every great love story deserves to be told, and ours is pretty great if I say so myself." So Winifred began writing, filling the pages with memories and emotions and all the small moments that had built their life together. She wrote about the day she had almost given up, about a knock on a closed door, about a man who believed in books and dreams enough to risk $5,000 on a stranger. She wrote about learning to love, about building a family, about finding home in the most unexpected place. She wrote late at night after the children were asleep, by lamplight at the kitchen table, while Emmett read in his favorite chair nearby. Sometimes he would look up from his book and catch her watching him, and the smile they exchanged held all the love and contentment of a decade together. Thomas grew into a bright, adventurous boy who wanted to be a rancher like his father, but also loved reading about far-off places. Catherine was quieter but equally passionate about books, declaring at age 6 that she wanted to run the bookshop when she grew up. They had their arguments and challenges, as all siblings did, but they were growing up surrounded by books and love and parents who showed them every day what it meant to build something worthwhile. On a warm June evening in 1895, when Thomas was 10 and Catherine 8, the family gathered on their front porch to watch the sunset paint the mountains in shades of orange and purple. Winifred sat in her rocking chair with Emmett beside her, their hands linked on the armrest between them. The children played in the yard, Catherine trying to teach Thomas a complicated game she had invented involving stones and sticks and rules that seemed to change every few minutes. "You ever miss the trail drives?" Winifred asked, a question she had never quite asked before. "The adventure of it all," Emmett considered for a moment. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity. Wake up, drive cattle, make camp, sleep, repeat. There was a clarity to it, but I don't miss the loneliness, and I wouldn't trade this life for all the adventure in the world." Even when Catherine convinces you to play tea party with her stuffed animals. Even when Thomas tracks mud through the house after you specifically told him to take his boots off. Even when I'm grumpy because the bookshop inventory doesn't balance and I can't figure out why. "Especially then," Emmett said, squeezing her hand. "Those are the moments that make life real, that make it matter." "You're a wise man, Emmett Xavier. I'm a lucky man. There's a difference." Catherine ran up to the porch, her face flushed with exertion. "Mama, will you read to us tonight?" "The story about the knight and the dragon. If you and Thomas get ready for bed without arguing, I'll read 2 chapters instead of 1. "I'll make him cooperate," Catherine promised seriously, then ran back to her brother. "Thomas, We have to go inside now or we only get one chapter." Watching his daughter negotiate with single-minded determination, Emmett laughed. "She's going to be formidable when she grows up. She gets that from you. Pretty sure she gets it from her mother, the woman who refused to give up on a failing bookshop in the middle of nowhere, Texas." "It's not nowhere. It's home." Later, after the children were bathed and pajama-clad, Winifred sat on Catherine's bed with Thomas sprawled on the floor nearby, reading from a well-worn copy of adventure stories. Emmett leaned against the doorframe, watching his family with an expression of such contentment that Winifred's heart squeezed with love. This was what they had built together. Not just a bookshop or a house or a financial success. They had built a family, a life full of small, ordinary moments that added up to something extraordinary. They had taken two lonely, lost people and created something beautiful and lasting. After the children were asleep, Winifred and Emmett returned to the porch, unwilling to go inside on such a perfect evening. The sky was full of stars, the same stars Emmett used to sleep under during his trail driving days. But now, he had something better than the lonely freedom of the open range. He had roots, he had purpose, he had love. "Thank you," Winifred said softly into the darkness. "For what?" "For walking into my bookshop that day. For seeing something worth saving when I couldn't see it myself. For staying when you could have gone back to trail driving. For loving me and our children and this life we've made together. For all of it." Emmett pulled her closer, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "You saved me just as much as I saved you, maybe more. I was drifting, trying to figure out how to keep a promise to my dead mother without knowing what that promise really meant. Then I found you, and suddenly everything made sense. The promise wasn't about grand gestures or big donations. It was about choosing to build something good. Something that makes the world a little bit better. That's what we've done together. Your mother would be proud of you. I think she'd be proud of us both. And I think my father would have loved you. He was a quiet man like me, but he had a big heart and he would have seen in you what I see. Strength and courage and a determination to make your own way in the world." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel slowly across the sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled and one of the ranch dogs barked in response. The wind carried the scent of sage and grass and the distinct smell of the desert cooling after a hot day. "I've been thinking," Winifred said eventually. "Maybe we should expand the bookshop again. There's that empty building next door that just went up for sale. We could knock through the wall and double our space. Add a proper reading room, maybe serve coffee and tea, make it a real gathering place for the community." Emmett smiled. "The woman who was closing her failing bookshop 12 years ago wants to expand. The woman who has a brilliant business partner and husband wants to keep growing. What do you think? Is it too ambitious?" "I think ambition is what got you here in the first place, and I think if you want to expand, we'll find a way to make it work. We always do." They talked late into the night, planning and dreaming and laughing about the future. When they finally went inside, Emmett checked on the children while Winifred prepared for bed. Finding them both sleeping soundly, Thomas with a book tucked under his pillow and Catherine clutching her favorite stuffed bear, Emmett felt a wave of gratitude so intense it was almost painful. He had spent years after his mother's death wondering what his purpose was, what he was supposed to do with his life. Now he knew. His purpose was here, in this house, with this family. His purpose was to love Winifred with everything he had, to raise their children to be good and kind and curious about the world, to help build a community where books and learning were valued alongside cattle and commerce. In bed, Winifred curled against him, her head on his chest, his arms around her. "I love you," she murmured, already half asleep. "I love you too, more than I can ever properly say. You show me every day. That's better than words." The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges, but always underpinned by the solid foundation of their love. The bookshop expansion Winifred had proposed became a reality, creating a beautiful space that became the cultural heart of Alpine. She started hosting author readings when traveling writers passed through, and occasionally even convinced professors from universities in Austin or El Paso to come speak about literature and history. Thomas, true to his childhood declaration, became a rancher, working alongside his father at the Cimarron Ranch and eventually taking over management when Emmett decided to step back and focus more on family and community activities. He married a schoolteacher named Sarah when he was 23, and they gave Winifred and Emmett 3 grandchildren in quick succession. Catherine did indeed take over running the bookshop, bringing fresh energy and new ideas while maintaining the community-focused approach her mother had pioneered. She remained unmarried by choice, declaring that the bookshop was her passion, and she had no interest in dividing her attention. She expanded into publishing, printing locally written books and distributing them throughout West Texas. Emmett and Winifred grew older together, their hair turning gray, their faces gaining new lines, but their love never diminishing. On their 25th wedding anniversary, they renewed their vows in the same church where they had married, surrounded by children and grandchildren and friends accumulated over decades. 25 years ago, I walked into a bookshop that was closing, Emmett said during the reception, giving a rare speech. I found a woman who had almost given up on her dreams. I gave her some money and told her to reopen. Best investment I ever made because it gave me everything that matters. A partner, a love, a family, a life worth living. Thank you, Winifred, for taking a chance on a cowboy with more money than sense. Thank you for seeing something in me worth investing in, Winifred replied, tears in her eyes. For believing in books and dreams and stubborn librarians who come to Texas with nothing but hope and determination. You gave me back my dreams, and then you gave me so much more. You gave me love and family and a home. You gave me everything. They danced together as the fiddles played, moving slowly across the floor they had danced on 25 years earlier. Their children and grandchildren watched with emotion in their eyes, seeing the love that had built their family on full display. Later, much later, when they were old and gray and their children were middle-aged with children of their own, Emmett and Winifred would sit on their porch and tell stories about the old days, about a bookshop that almost failed, about a cowboy who walked in with an impossible offer, about falling in love surrounded by books and building a life that exceeded their wildest dreams. You think we'll be remembered? Winifred asked one evening when she was 70 and Emmett 74, both of them still sharp-minded but increasingly aware of their mortality. Does it matter? Emmett replied, We lived a good life. We loved each other and our children. We made our corner of the world a little bit better. That's enough. You're right, it is enough. More than enough. But they were remembered. Catherine published her mother's journal, the one Emmett had given her on their 10th anniversary, now filled with decades of stories and memories. It sold well throughout Texas, a love story set against the backdrop of the changing West. People read about the librarian and the cowboy, and were reminded that sometimes salvation comes in unexpected forms, that love can bloom in the most unlikely places, and that two people with courage and faith can build something that lasts. Emmett passed away peacefully in his sleep at age 82, Winifred beside him in the bed they had shared for over 3 decades. His last words were still the best investment I ever made, and Winifred knew he was talking about her, about them, about the life they had built together. She lived another 5 years, spending them surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren who had all been touched by the love story that had started in a failing bookshop in 1883. She spent her days at the bookshop Catherine ran, reading to yet another generation of children, telling stories about their grandfather and the way he had saved her when she needed saving most. On a warm spring morning in 1933, Winifred passed away quietly in her favorite chair at the bookshop, a book open on her lap. Catherine found her there and wept, not just for her loss, but for the blessing of having had such parents, such an example of what love and partnership could be. At her funeral, Thomas told the story his father had told him about seeing a woman through a bookshop window, crying over poetry, and knowing that something had to be done. Catherine read from her mother's journal, the parts about falling in love and building a family and finding home in the West Texas desert. They buried Winifred next to Emmett in the Alpine cemetery, under oak trees they had both loved. The headstone was simple: Winifred and Emmett Xavier. They built something beautiful. The bookshop continued for generations, run first by Catherine, then by her nephew, then by his daughter. It remained a cornerstone of Alpine's community, a testament to what two people with vision and determination could create. Inside, on a special shelf near the entrance, they kept the first book Emmett had ever bought from Winifred, a volume of Keats that she had been reading the day he walked in. A small plaque explained its significance, telling the story of the librarian and the cowboy and the love that had saved them both. And sometimes, on quiet afternoons when the Texas sun slanted through the windows just right, workers in the bookshop swore they could feel the presence of two people who had loved each other and loved books, and had understood that both were worth fighting for. They could almost see a tall cowboy with weathered hands carefully shelving volumes, a woman with kind eyes reading to children gathered at her feet, two people whose love had become legend. The story of Emmett and Winifred Xavier became part of Alpine's history, told and retold with variations, but always maintaining the essential truth: that sometimes salvation comes when you least expect it, that love can bloom in the most unlikely circumstances, and that the best investments are the ones made in people and dreams. Their descendants spread throughout Texas and beyond, but they all carried pieces of the story, passing it down to their own children along with the values their ancestors had embodied. The importance of education and literature, the value of community and connection, the power of believing in someone when they have stopped believing in themselves, the courage to take a risk on love. In Alpine itself, the bookshop stood for over 100 years, adapting to changing times but never losing its essential character as a place where books and people came together. Through the Depression and World War II, through the boom times and the bust, through all the changes that transformed the American West from frontier to modern civilization, the bookshop endured. It became an institution, a landmark, a piece of living history that connected present to past. The house Emmett had built remained in the family as well, lovingly maintained through generations. The library room with its built-in shelves still held many of the original books Winifred had treasured. The front porch where they had spent countless evenings still offered the same view of the mountains. New children played in the yard where Thomas and Catherine had once played. New couples sat in rocking chairs watching sunsets, creating their own memories while honoring those who had come before. The story of how it all began never lost its power to move people. The image of a woman closing a failing bookshop, resigned to defeat, and a cowboy walking in with an offer that seemed too good to be true. The audacity of buying every book and saying, "Reopen it." The faith required to trust a stranger with your dreams. The love that grew from respect and shared values and countless hours working side by side. It was a very Western story in many ways, embodying the frontier spirit of reinvention and second chances. But it was also a universal story about human connection, about recognizing someone worth knowing, about choosing to build rather than drift, about turning toward love instead of away from it. And at its heart was a truth that Emmett and Winifred had both understood, even if they had not always been able to articulate it. That the things we create together are always more meaningful than the things we create alone. That taking a risk on another person is never really a risk if you do it with an open heart and genuine faith. That love, like a good book, can transport us to places we never imagined we could go. The bookshop that had almost closed in 1883 instead became a legacy. The librarian who had almost given up instead became a beloved figure in local history. The cowboy who had made an impulsive, generous offer instead found the purpose and family he had been seeking. Together, they proved that sometimes the best stories are not found in books, but in the lives people build when they are brave enough to believe in something bigger than themselves. And so the story endured, passed down through generations, adapted into different forms but always maintaining its essential truth. It reminded people that miracles can happen in the most ordinary places, that love often arrives when we have stopped looking for it, and that the investments we make in others, in community, in things that matter beyond ourselves, are the ones that truly pay dividends that last forever. In the end, what Emmett and Winifred built was not just a bookshop or a family or a life together. They built a legacy of love and literacy, of courage and connection, of two people who found each other at exactly the right moment and chose to build something beautiful. That legacy lived on in every book sold, every child read to, every person who walked into that bookshop and felt the echo of something special that had happened there long ago. It lived on in their descendants, who inherited not just their names but their values. In grandchildren who became teachers and writers and ranchers and business owners, all of them carrying forward the lesson that you should never give up on your dreams, and that love is worth any risk. In great-grandchildren, who grew up hearing the story and understanding that their family had been built on a foundation of faith and courage, and a cowboy who knew how to recognize something worth saving when he saw it. And it lived on in Alpine itself, a town that had grown from a rough frontier settlement into a thriving community, anchored in part by the cultural institution that Winifred had established and Emmett had saved. The bookshop had become more than a business. It was a symbol of what was possible when people believed in beauty and knowledge, and the power of stories to change lives. On summer evenings, when the heat finally broke and the desert air turned cool and sweet, people still walked past the bookshop on Avenue E and looked in the windows at the shelves full of books. Some of them knew the story of how it had almost closed in 1883. Some of them were descendants of Emmett and Winifred, stopping by to pay their respects to family history. And some were simply people who loved books, drawn by the same pull that had driven Winifred to start the shop in the first place. All of them, whether they knew it or not, were benefiting from a decision made one spring afternoon over 100 years earlier. A decision by a grieving cowboy to honor his mother's memory by helping someone in need. A decision by a desperate librarian to trust a stranger and accept a miracle. A decision by two people to build something together instead of facing their futures alone. Those decisions had echoed through time, creating ripples that spread far beyond what either Emmett or Winifred could have imagined. They had started with books and evolved into so much more. Love, family, community, legacy. All because a cowboy bought every book and said reopen it, and a librarian was brave enough to say yes.